Welcome to the 700 Club. U.S. and Chinese officials at the highest levels are working to avert a trade war. Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin spoke with Chinese officials in an effort to restart negotiations.
While the two nations are working to reach an agreement on trade, one group warns that China is carrying out a secret campaign to weaken America. CBN national security correspondent Eric Phillips has more.
Experts say China is using every weapon in its arsenal to try and take America down. Cyber crimes, espionage, blackmail, and it's increasingly trying to recruit Americans to do its bidding. Now a new group in Washington is sounding the alarm, hoping to wake people up.
I believe Communist China has been at war with the United States for at least 28 years.
Frank Gaffney served in the Defense Department for President Reagan and now leads the Center for Security Policy. More recently, he's joined the Committee on the Present Danger, China. Also on the committee, former Breitbart News exec Steve Bannon.
There is no doubt in my mind that Communist China, under the Chinese Communist Party, represents the single most serious threat we face in the world today. The more so because an awful lot of us don't appreciate that.
He points to China's ramped-up economic warfare against the U.S., including targeting stateside operatives under the direction of Chinese President Xi Jinping.
The Chinese Communist Party has used everything from the students it sends to the United States to researchers working in American laboratories to Chinese nationals working in American companies, to cyber techniques, to old-fashioned spies.
His end game is to be the global leader geopolitically, economically, and militarily. Stop. And he'll stop at nothing to be that.
Bill Evanina, director of the National Counterintelligence and Security Center, says China is robbing us blind.
We're probably estimating anywhere from $300 to $500 billion a year in economic loss just from the theft of intellectual property and trade secrets. Potentially, jobs are not there for you in the long run because it's been stolen by the government of China and it's been first to market there.
That includes military-grade technology. Officials say stolen secrets allow China to develop some weapons faster, posing a direct threat to U.S. national security.
And it can translate into the loss of American lives, almost inevitably.
That's why Gaffney hopes this committee can both educate the public and make Washington more aware. Officials say, for the average citizen, a key to winning this war comes back to good cyber hygiene.
Because as Americans, we have an inability to not click a link. And our adversaries know that.
Evanina says the strange dichotomy here is that the U.S. needs to participate in trade with China in order for there to be a healthy global economy. But he says officials have to be vigilant, knowing that it's not a case of if China will try to cheat the system, but when. In Washington, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Well, the win on that is already happening, and it has been happening for decades. The economic espionage that China has been conducting in the United States to get our top technology has been going on literally for decades. And they've even tried to target the federal employees. There was a Chinese hack of a database to get personal information of all the federal employees. So they're trying to find out very specific and detailed information about each member of the government. Why? To help them with espionage. This is not a news story. This has been going on for some time. The issue is we haven't been awakened to it, and it seems like we're not doing anything in order to combat it. And what do you do? Do you say to a major trade partner, sorry, because of your other activities, you're no longer allowed to trade within our borders? So that would definitely be a wake-up call for them. Well, in other news, fallout from the sex trafficking case against billionaire Jeffrey Epstein is reaching the Trump administration. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Democrats are calling for the resignation of President Trump's labor secretary, Alexander Acosta, citing his role as a prosecutor in a similar case involving Epstein 12 years ago. Charlene Aaron has a story.
Deal that allowed wealthy financier Jeffrey Epstein to register as a sex offender and serve 13 months in jail is putting pressure on Labor Secretary Alexandra Acosta, the U.S. attorney for Florida at the time. Epstein is charged with running a sex trafficking ring. A federal indictment charges he sexually exploited and abused dozens of minor girls, some as young as 14. President Trump pressed about his relationship with Epstein, a man he once praised, but eventually barred from his Mar-a-Lago resort.
He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
Former President Clinton, who also knew Epstein, saying he knows nothing about the terrible crimes and that he has not spoken to Epstein in well over a decade. Democrats are calling on Acosta to resign for his role in granting Epstein immunity years ago in a similar case in Florida in 2007.
I pled guilty to solicitation of prostitution.
If he refuses to resign, President Trump should fire him.
Acosta tweeted about the new charges, saying, "The crimes committed by Epstein are horrific, and I am pleased that New York prosecutors are moving forward with the case based on new evidence." According to the Miami Herald, most of Epstein's victims came from disadvantaged families, single-parent homes, or foster care. On CBN's Newswatch program, Lila McElwaite of Exodus Cry, a nonprofit committed to abolishing sex trafficking, said traffickers are often people no one expects.
They're people who are in business and government and the clergy and positions of authority in our society a lot of the time.
McElwaite says language needs to be more direct when it comes to victims and traffickers.
Calling men who buy sex customers, thinking of traffickers and pimps as just ordinary businessmen. And it's a truly sinister movement to try and normalize prostitution, which we know is a system of exploitation of the most vulnerable in our midst, especially children.
Meanwhile, President Trump says he will take a close look at the circumstances of the 2007 plea deal. But for now, he's standing by Secretary Acosta. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thanks, Charlene. Britain's ambassador to the United States is resigning after cables criticizing the Trump administration came to light. Former Ambassador Kim Derrick's post was due to end this year, but he says under the current circumstances, it's best to make way for a new ambassador now. President Trump said he could no longer work with Derrick after leaked cables quoted him calling the administration, quote, inept and clumsy. Well, the number of detentions at the southern border has dropped off dramatically in June. Authorities took 104,000 people into custody, down from 144,000 arrests in May. That's a decrease of 28%. U.S. officials say the decrease is due to Mexico cracking down on immigrants crossing its border. Nevertheless, it marks 4 months in a row that more than 100,000 people have been caught entering the country illegally, creating a huge strain on the Border Patrol and reports of inhumane treatment at overcrowded detention centers. A watchdog group is calling for a ban on the U.S. government's use of facial recognition technology. Federal authorities are reportedly using the surveillance technology to scan millions of Americans' faces without their consent. Now, the nonprofit group Fight for the Future says the technology poses, quote, a profound threat, and we need to ban it entirely. Ohio Republican Jim Jordan is speaking out against government agencies using public records for facial recognition surveillance.
20 states have given their Bureau of Motor Vehicles, Department of Motor, the database, driver's license database, they've just given access to that to the FBI. No individual signed off on that when they renewed their driver's license, got their driver. They didn't sign any waiver saying, oh, it's okay to turn my information, my photo over to the FBI. No elected officials voted to allow that to happen.
The FBI and Immigration and Customs Enforcement agencies, according to the Washington Post, are mining state driver's license databases and DMV records of American citizens. OBAMACARE is facing another legal challenge. An appeals court heard arguments yesterday at issue whether a Texas judge acted properly in striking it down by ending the individual mandate. CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson reports on how politicians are staking out their positions in this court fight.
As the federal appeals court heard arguments on the Affordable Care Act's constitutionality, Democrats on the Hill warned what could happen if Obamacare is struck down.
The stakes cannot be higher.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer joined by Democrat lawmakers holding up pictures of Americans positively affected by Obamacare, blaming Republicans if millions of Americans were to lose their health care.
If Republicans prevail, these protections are obliterated overnight. They go home and they say they want to protect pre-existing conditions, and then they act to take them away and do nothing to preserve them.
But on the Senate floor,
blaming Republicans in Congress for a yet-to-be-decided court case doesn't make a lot of sense.
Republican Senator John Cornyn argued that claim is untrue.
If there's one thing that I think there is a consensus on in the health care field in Congress, it is that pre-existing conditions should be covered.
Meanwhile,
if we win the House back, keep the Senate, and win the presidency, we're going to have a plan that blows away Obamacare. It'll be less expensive, and it'll be far better health care and health insurance. And we'll be announcing it over the next month or so.
President Trump is teasing a forthcoming GOP health care plan. Many analysts believe if the Fifth Circuit upholds Obamacare, the Supreme Court won't take it up again. Regardless of the court's decision, it's clear health care will certainly dominate the 2020 elections. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abigail. And of course, Gordon, the health care issue played a big role in the 2018 midterm elections.
Oh, it did. And then the Republicans took a pass. They had the votes. If they wanted to overturn Obamacare, they could have. But then it turns out they didn't have the votes, that they couldn't hold their coalition together. They couldn't get all the rank and file to actually vote on a bill. So to hear promises that there's a new bill coming, I'm not sure I'm going to believe it. Here's a fundamental, though. I think our health care services in America are fundamentally broken because the marketplace is so obscure. No one really knows what the real costs are. Just this week, we've had the drug companies saying you can't force us to actually advertise what the drug is going to cost because we don't know. What an incredible thing for a manufacturer to say. We don't know what the ultimate cost is going to be to the consumer because that depends entirely on what the insurance is and what type of insurance they have. I personally had a conversation with a doctor and was asking, well, what's this going to cost? And he looked me in the eye and said, I don't know. So you have a system where the provider doesn't know, the manufacturer doesn't know, the consumer doesn't know. So how do you ever have a clear market? And is it any wonder that our healthcare costs are spiraling out of control? Many small businesses, you're dealing with a substantial amount of your budget going just to pay health insurance premiums. I do know those premiums have gone up since Obamacare, so I don't think that's the solution. The system is broken. There's no transparency. There's no real market. Anyone buying health care in a marketplace has no idea what you're getting into. You have no idea what the cost is going to be. And the big surprise is you find out after the procedure.